So I'm a co-founder and the political and policy advisor of the Deep Sea Conservation Coalition. It's a coalition of over 70 organizations worldwide that has come together to promote effective conservation and protection of deep sea ecosystems and species. The European Union is now currently debating legislation to manage deep sea fisheries. This is a first for the European Union, or at least the first in 10 years that they've actually tried to do this. There is legislation currently in place, but it's been universally recognized as being inadequate to the task of protecting deep sea ecosystems and ensuring sustainable deep sea fisheries. In other words, sustainable catches of the species that are actually brought up in the nets. This process will go on for another year or so. The European Commission put out a proposal in July of 2012, and it's currently being debated within the Fisheries Committee of the European Parliament. There is a group of members of European Parliament on the committee that are pushing for real change to the regulation of deep sea fisheries, for measures or regulations that would protect deep sea ecosystems, that would require a precautionary approach to the management of these fisheries. In other words, you need to study these ecosystems first, know what's there as best you can, and then design a management regime that can fish in those ecosystems, assuming it's possible, with minimal impact on it and on a selective basis. Unfortunately, there is a large group of the members of the European Parliament's Fisheries Committee that are basically doing what the industry is telling them to do. They have put forward a series of proposals to counter the proposals coming from the European Commission and the more progressive members of the European Parliament Fisheries Committee. And the industry, the members of the Parliament that are supporting the industry are claiming that their proposals will actually protect these ecosystems. But when you look at what they've actually proposed, the legislation that they are proposing, you realize there's very, very little substance to it. It basically follows a set of steps taken by a regional treaty organization in the Northeast Atlantic, which has had mixed success in managing deep sea fisheries. Debate over new legislation in the European Parliament is not something that's just happening out of thin air. This process is actually the culmination of 10 years of rather intensive international debate and negotiation over the management of deep sea fisheries and the protection of deep sea ecosystems on the high seas. Basically, the United Nations General Assembly began addressing this issue in 2002, in part as a result of the pressure being brought to bear by NGOs, but more importantly, because of the concerns being raised by deep sea biologists that were, on the one hand, discovering new species and new ecosystems in the deep sea, and on the other hand, seeing the damage firsthand of trawling on seamounts and other types of deep sea ecosystems, highly destructive type of technology when used to trawl on corals, for example, or deep sea sponges. And the UN General Assembly came back to this issue over and over again. And it was an issue of international equity, it was an international biodiversity, it was an issue of sustainable management of fisheries, it was an issue of international governance and the rule of law. But ultimately what it boiled down to was it was a debate about deep sea fisheries on the high seas, these are the international waters of the world's oceans, over whether a handful of nations had the right to license their vessels to go out, catch relatively small amounts of highly vulnerable fish, and destroy ecosystems on behalf of the rest of the world. In other words, protecting the world's oceans commons was the right and the responsibilities of all nations, and no one nation or group of nations had the right to make those decisions on its own. The oceans are ours. The oceans belong to all of us. Fishermen have a right to fish, but it's not a divine right to fish. With that right to fish comes responsibility, and it's a responsibility to all of the rest of us, the public. And it's a responsibility to us in terms of providing healthy seafood, but also a responsibility to us in terms of protecting the environment in which they're operating. What we need is the legislators, the policymakers, the members, not only the members of European Parliament, but in the case of this legislation in Europe, also the individual member states. France needs to step up. The UK, Spain, Portugal, Germany, and the other countries, and say we're going to adopt a piece of legislation that makes sense politically, that makes sense legally, that protects the environment. Nobody is saying no to any deep sea fishing. what this legislation is intended to do is to effect a shift from high impact, highly destructive fisheries which catch lots and lots of different species about which we know very little, to low impact, selective fishing, which ultimately has a much better future in the marketplace. The market is demanding low impact fisheries, selective fisheries, sustainable fisheries. These are the trends. So for all those reasons, the 10 years of international debate, all of the expertise that's been brought to bear on this, all of the lessons that have been learned thus far in global efforts in the North Pacific, in the South Pacific, in the Antarctic Ocean, in the North Atlantic, to try to manage these fisheries, the European Union has a unique opportunity to get it right.